His friends were murdered every now and then. He was tasked to kill the most dangerous criminal in human history. But at the end of the day, he realized the criminal was just an agent of CIA whose fear was created hypothetically. Welcome back to Paramount Recaps. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me. The movie kicks off on March 19, 2003, with Iraqi General Mohammed al-Rawi making a hasty exit from his home as Baghdad faces heavy bombing. Just before he leaves, he hands a notebook to his aide, Syed, telling him to alert the officers to get to their safe houses and wait for further instructions. Fast forward 4 weeks, and we meet U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer Roy Miller and his platoon. They've been tasked with checking out a warehouse that's supposedly packed with Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Miller briefs his team about the site, which has reports of nerve agents, chemical-tipped missiles, and even live pathogens. To his surprise, when they arrive, the warehouse isn't secured at all. Looters are coming and going without a care. Miller calls over Lieutenant Asira, who's in charge of the area. Asira informs him there's a sniper in a nearby tower and that the 101st Airborne Division is too short-staffed to properly secure the perimeter. Miller gathers his men, pointing out that the suspected weapons are supposedly located in the northwest corner, with the sniper holed up on the 5th floor of the southeast corner. He hatches a plan to draw the sniper out so they can take him out. After they manage to neutralize the sniper, Miller realizes the warehouse is completely empty. Frustrated and confused, he vents that this is the 3rd time they've come up empty-handed. Later, Miller meets Colonel Bethel to discuss the situation. He tells her that the intelligence they're relying on isn't accurate and is leading them in circles. Bethel warns him not to stir the pot, especially since there's so much pressure to find something significant for the media back in Washington. She brushes off Miller's concerns, insisting that he should just follow orders. During a debriefing, Captain Jonathan VA states they'll keep targeting high-priority sites because everyone back home is eagerly waiting for news of the weapons. He explains that they have a detailed media plan ready to highlight their successes. Miller raises his hand to voice his concerns about the inaccurate intel he's been getting, but the high-ranking officials quickly dismiss him, insisting that the information is solid. Undeterred, Miller brings up the Diania site from the previous week, where the 101st suffered casualties, only to find it was just a toilet factory. He argues that there's a serious disconnect between the intel they receive and the reality on the ground. The officials remind him that his job is simply to carry out orders, not to question the information. Next, Miller's team is sent to the Al Mansur site. While preparing for this mission, CIA agent Martin Brown approaches him and introduces himself. Martin warns Miller that he's about to waste his time because the next site was already checked by a UN biological team 2 months ago and has been confirmed empty. Martin gives Miller his card, saying the situation doesn't add up and encourages him to reach out if he finds anything noteworthy. Meanwhile, U.S. Department of Defense official Clark Poundstone is at the airport, welcoming back Iraqi exile politician Ahmed Zubedi. A Wall Street Journal reporter named Lori Denny approaches Poundstone, asking for a direct conversation with Miller, but he brushes her off. As Miller and his team head towards their next destination, they get caught in a crowd of angry Iraqi civilians. Miller tells some of his men to get out of their vehicle to clear the traffic, but soon realizes they're too exposed to potential enemy fire and calls them back. Poundstone has orders to install Ahmed Zubedi as the head of the new Iraqi government, stating they're convening an Iraqi Freedom Convention inside the Green Zone. They expect representatives from the 3 main ethnic groups, the Kurds, Shia, and Sunni, all vying for power. However, CIA agent Brown is skeptical, arguing that Zubedi hasn't been in Iraq for 30 years and believes his return from exile doesn't hold any weight. Poundstone insists Zubedi is the best option they have for establishing a stable democracy, praising the intel they've received from it. Martin counters that Zubedi might have been feeding them false information for years and is simply unreliable. Poundstone argues that Martin is questioning every piece of evidence to the point where they can't make any progress. Martin insists they can't just hand over the country to an unknown exile. He believes they need to involve the Iraqi army in stabilizing the country. Meanwhile, an Iraqi civilian named Freddie spots some high-ranking Iraqi officials entering a house. He quickly hops into his car and speeds away. Inside the house, General Ali and his officers discuss the current state of affairs. Saeed, the meeting's host, informs everyone that Saddam has fled and the Americans will soon occupy the entire country. He warns that they'll have to make tough decisions while waiting for orders, emphasizing that their choices now will shape Iraq's future. Back at another unproductive site, Miller hears some alarming noises. He investigates and finds Sergeant Wilkins pinning a man to the ground. Wilkins explains that the guy is out of control. The man turns out out to be Freddy, who desperately wants to speak with Miller about something important. Freddy finally calms down after being let go and spills the beans to Miller. He claims he spotted some high-ranking members of the WMDs party having a meeting in a nearby house. When Miller asks why he should trust him, Freddy simply replies that he's just trying to help out. Miller decides to take Freddy along and instructs his team to grab Freddy's car, but also to find another vehicle. He knows that if they roll up in those big Humvees, the guys in the house will see them coming from a mile away. Gathering his men, Miller lays out the plan. He wants Freddy riding shotgun in the first car while one of his soldiers sits in the back, keeping an eye on him. The rest of the team will roll in a pickup truck right behind them. Meanwhile, there's a heated argument happening between the WMDs party members. General al-Rawi steps in to cool things down, stating that the streets of Iraq are chaotic and that violence is on the rise. He believes that while the Americans are trying to create a democracy, they will eventually realize they need him and his help. He decides to wait for an offer from the Americans regarding Iraq's future and prepares to fight if they don't come. As the meeting wraps up, Miller and his team arrive at the house and spot some guys leaving while armed. Without wasting any time, Miller orders his men to seize the car with 3 guys inside and take control of the house. As they burst in, a brief shootout breaks out. General Ali manages to slip away, but Syed gets caught. Miller decides to use Freddy as his translator. Miller grabs Ali's notebook, thinking it might help, and they take Syed back to camp to see if he has any info on the weapons of mass destruction. Syed claims that only Ali knows where the WMDs are, but he'll only tell Miller where Ali is if Miller promises to protect his family. Miller agrees. Just as they're about to get more information from Syed, special operations personnel show up and take him away. While being taken out, Syed mentions that Miller has his notebook. The leader of the special ops team confronts Miller about it, but Miller denies having it. This leads to a scuffle, during which Miller discreetly hands the notebook to Freddy to hide it. After confirming that Miller doesn't have the notebook, the special ops team leaves. Miller and his crew quickly realize that Freddy is missing along with the notebook, so they split up to search for him. Eventually, Miller catches up with Freddy, who is struggling to climb over a wall due to his prosthetic leg. Freddy insists he was going to return the notebook after the earlier commotion. Meanwhile, journalist Dan is once again complaining to Poundstone about the situation, but Poundstone brushes her off, saying the stakes are higher than her role in selling hers. Dan implies that her publication ran stories about WMDs based on Poundstone's intel, and now she needs to speak to Miller to get the scoop behind all of it. Miller heads over to Martin's hotel room in the Green Zone and tells him everything that's been happening, handing him the notebook. Martin arranges for Miller to gain access to the prison where Syed is being interrogated. Just then, Dan confronts Miller, questioning him about the false reports of WMDs. Miller plays it cool as he talks to Syed, who looks like he's been through hell after being tortured. Syed tells Miller they followed all instructions from the last meeting. When Miller presses him about which meeting, Syed simply replies with one word: Jordan. Miller then confronts Dan about the inaccurate intel she published, but she refuses to reveal her source. When Miller suggests that Ali is the source, Dan reluctantly admits that he met with a high-ranking official in February in Jordan. This leads Miller to realize that Poundstone's men are now hunting Ali, which can only mean one thing. Ali confirmed there were no Iraqi WMDs and is now a major liability. Poundstone ends up confiscating the notebook from Martin, which has details about Ali's safe houses in it. When Miller tries to set up a meeting with Ali, he gets snatched up by Ali's guys. This happens just after Poundstone announces that the entire Iraqi army is being disbanded, putting the general in a tough spot. Eventually, Miller faces off with al-Rawi, who turns out to be Ali. Ali tells Miller that, contrary to what Poundstone has been spreading, they've known all along that there are no WMDs in Iraq, as production ended in the early 90s. Miller tells Ali that he wants to bring him in to share his side of the story, but Ali wonders if anyone has verified what Poundstone said. It's clear that if anyone in the government had cared about getting the facts right, they could have easily done so. Instead, Ali asserts that the government wanted to hear lies. They wanted Saddam gone, and they got what they wanted. Shortly before their meeting, the U.S. government disbands the Iraqi army, putting Ali in a precarious position. He explains to Miller that when he first came forward with his intel, he was promised a place in the new Iraq. However, he realizes now that he's just been used as a pawn for Poundstone and his allies, and they'll get rid of him as soon as they have a chance. Poundstone's team launches attacks on the locations mentioned in the notebook. When they arrive at the general's hideout, he makes a run for it, ordering one of his men to take out Miller. In a desperate struggle, Miller manages to take down his captor and chases after Ali. At last, Miller corners Ali, but just then, Freddy shows up and shoots the general. Freddy believes that Ali is a tyrant and a traitor to the Iraqi. With the only witness against Poundstone now dead, Miller tells Freddy to get out of there while he still can. Later, Miller writes a scathing report and confronts Poundstone during a meeting, handing over the the document. However, Poundstone brushes it off, insisting that WMDs don't matter anymore. He then returns to the meeting only to see Iraqi faction leaders rejecting Zubedi, the U.S.'s pick for Iraq's leader, as nothing more than an American puppet, storming out in protest. Afterward, Dan receives Miller's report via email, which is sent to major news outlets around the globe. In the end, the conclusion is bittersweet for Miller. He's able to expose Poundstone's lies, but the damage has already been done to the Iraqi. Although the film takes creative liberties with characters and events, it accurately reflects how the narrative surrounding Iraqi WMDs was used as a pretext for invasion, and how no evidence of those weapons was ever found. And with that, the movie wraps up.